All right, we'll get started with council meeting follow-up. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody. I don't think I have anything for this item.
Okay, anybody else? No? All right, we'll go to preseason snow fighting briefing, snow routes and parks, snow operations. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We like to take the opportunity with council early on in the snow season to give you a feel for our approach and the tactics we take and so on to deal with the snow issues that we encounter as a community. We thought we'd take a little bit of a different approach in our discussion with you tonight to not only talk about streets and the approach that the streets team takes to help keep streets open, but also with regard to the operations that Parks oversees as well, in that you'll probably be surprised with regard to the amount of time and effort and places they touch as well. And so we wanted you to hear that and understand that approach. And if you have any questions or input or other things we may need to do, tonight would be the opportunity to go through all that with you. So if I could defer to Mr. Beamer and Ms. Lopez to walk us through these things, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
Mayor, Council, I was actually going to defer to Shad Rogers, who's our streets and traffic manager, and he just started laughing at me.
I saw that, by the way.
A couple months ago, I actually asked him, I said, so when are we going to get the first snow? He goes, oh, by the end of October. And I said, well, I could have made that prediction. But so we've had 2 snows under our belt already. So you've seen our equipment out. We've got 13 plows, dual axle dump trucks with plows. We've got additional 2 graders and a loader that we can also deploy if necessary. Our standard operations are we run 2 10-hour shifts. We typically are not out on the street between midnight and 4 a.m. unless the snow patterns dictate that we need to shift from a 10-hour to round the clock to 12-hour shifts. So that is the pattern that you will see. Like last spring when we had that heavy snow that started Saturday night and went all the way through Tuesday, we were running 24-hour shifts well into Friday, that next Friday afternoon when we finally went off. This time of year, we will generally plow to the side of the street. We allow Mother Nature to help us with that runoff and melting. During the colder months, we will typically plow to the center of the street just to allow vehicle traffic to driveways and businesses and residents. And you will then see us generally come back later after the snow has subsided to start picking up those windrows and hauling them to dump sites that we've got scattered throughout the community. So annually we spend roughly $350,000 on what we refer to, currently we have Ice Slicer under contract, but it can depend upon what YDOT contracts with, because we piggyback on their contract for cost savings on that material. So we obviously, streets personnel are all deployed. We also pull in people from CPU as well as parks to man our shifts to keep the community running. Our primary routes are arterial and collector routes, just so that you can get to and from the major hospital, business centers, retail centers. We very rarely will go into residential areas unless obviously they are just impassable and they have no other means to get in or out of residential neighborhoods. When school's in session, we will also concentrate around the school sites and bus routes so that buses can get to the bus stops to pick up the kids to get them to school. So I'm not sure, Fleur, we got the maps. We got 3 maps, both for the west, central, and eastern portions of the city. So you will see those maps, and they are published on the city's website, so that you can see exactly if you're living on a snow route or not. And again, most residential streets do not see a plow go down their street. Obviously, the snowstorm we had last spring was an exception to that rule, where people simply could not get in or out of their neighborhoods. So, and I would have to defer to Shad to let you know exactly what the lane mileage is that we have currently under our jurisdiction to plow, including what we have now. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Councilman Gamros.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was curious, are the drivers, do they just know the area as well and they have an idea of what roads they need to plow? Are there GPS units with the plows that, I guess make more efficient, what turns you should be taking to hit all your routes in the most efficient manner? I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Mayor, Councilmember, very good question. We do not have GPS units in the cabs of these trucks. A lot of these drivers are very well trained and have been doing it for a number of years. Obviously, the newer drivers are usually teamed up with a buddy to start to learn these routes. And the most efficient routing, it really does depend on the snow patterns and the wind patterns in particular, because we could get inundated on the east side of Casper and the wind can pick up, and we will have to simply concentrate our efforts there much more so than in the downtown core of Casper where the wind's not blowing near as hard, or it can vary drastically on the weather patterns.
Any other questions? Okay. Nope. Councilman Cathy.
Does, according to our maps here, YDOT actually plows from Casper Mountain Road over to roughly 21st Street? Is that about right?
I believe Casper Mountain Road is ours all the way to Warren Boulevard.
No, I'm talking about Outer Drive.
Oh, Outer Drive. There is a stretch of Outer Drive, you're correct, that's not inside city limits. So I think that's essentially from Country Club, maybe towards Casper Mountain Road. The rest of it, we will plow.
And then we're plowing Poplar and First Street, or does YDOT take care of some of those? No?
Poplar and First Street are routes to plow,
And CY?
as well as Seaway.
I'm seeing the yes shaking over there.
Mayor, Council, I'm trying to answer your question.
I understand. No, I'm just trying to figure out for sure which of the state highways we're actually plowing and which ones YDOT are plowing. So that's why I was asking.
Mayor, Councilman, very good questions. In the larger municipalities, the city is actually responsible for those major arterials and collectors within the city limits.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Mayor, Council, thank you. So for the City of Casper Parks operations, we have responsibility for approximately 35 parking lots. That's about 34 acres. We do not we do not remove snow from unpaved parking lots, so dirt lots are not included in this count. We also remove snow from about 27 miles of trail, sidewalk around the community, as well as all the transit bus stops that are on city property or adjacent to city property. Also, based on the weather patterns and the need, we will assist our streets department in plowing about 7 miles of roadway around the Casper Event Center to ensure access, particularly when there are events at that facility throughout the day or the evenings that are impacted. As far as our shifts go, when the snow is such that it calls for it, we will shift our shifts to begin at 4 a.m. and go through noon. So that allows us to get out in the community and start hitting those priority areas long before people are utilizing sidewalks, parking lots, pathways, those kinds of facilities. We have 11 employees that are full-time and non-full-time that we can bring on throughout the entire Parks, Rec, and Public Facilities Department to assist in these efforts when they're not being loaned out to streets to work on our roadways. And then as far as our snow fighting fleet, we do have 1 loader, 1 backhoe, 4 pickup trucks that are equipped with snow plows, and then 3 smaller utility vehicles with plows that we use primarily for sidewalks and pathways. So our city for us is divided into 10 priority areas, and as we continue to evaluate our system and see the effectiveness throughout the next season, this may change in the future, but right now we've established 10 priority areas. Really, originally, those areas were established because we have 9 pieces of equipment that we operate, and each person is assigned a piece of equipment, and they would go out and take care of certain areas. And so we just kind of converted that to our priorities and then adjusted where we felt like it was necessary. And again, things will continue to adjust as we monitor the efficiency and see where we can make improvements to better serve the public. So when we were considering our priorities, again, it was that equipment use, but also any existing agreements that we have in place that require us to remove snow, and also to maximize that operational efficiency. And so where the priorities may seem a little skewed or don't seem to make sense because the facility doesn't get a lot of use or things like that, oftentimes that's an operational efficiency piece. So it doesn't make sense to drive right past a parking lot to go to another location and then have to turn around and go back to that lot later in the day to take care of that. So we're trying to maximize our efficiency by catching things en route. So we can review our maps. We have 5. We've kind of tried to divide the city into areas where it's a little bit easier for you to see our areas of responsibility because they are spread out quite a bit throughout the community. And so you'll see in the south area, probably the biggest areas are the pathway that runs on Casper Mountain Road, and that is a lower priority. Our pathways are done when we can, but we want to make sure that our parking lots and other areas where people need to get access to get to work for city facilities or to be able to park for public access to our businesses and other areas are prioritized a little bit higher than that. So we've got some pathways on the south and then employee access into the golf course so those employees can continue to run their operations during snowstorms. Go ahead, Fleur. So the north side, and on these maps, all of the red kind of crosshatch pattern is city-owned property, so we wanted to designate that. On the north side, certainly the Casper Event Center and the pathways, the roadways leading up to that facility, and then the pathway along the Platte River there are the main areas that we try to hit in the north side. Also, we do the dog park, and we'll try to hit the pathway within the dog park. If we get a chance to hit that, usually a little bit lesser priority. And then, parking lots so that people can access the trail system is included. Metro Animal Control also included so that people can get up to that facility and park in their parking lot. Next one. Okay, so this east side map, again, shows primarily trails that we try to prioritize. Some of these are prioritized a little bit higher because of use and because, of the functionality of the actual pathway. So those are the areas on the east side of town. Areas on the west side, again, the Platte River Trail is our primary objective there, along with some pretty important parking lots throughout, and also like parking lots so that people can still go to those facilities, walk their pets, do those kinds of things. And the last one I think is the most busy. And this is our central area. This is where we really focus a majority of our initial efforts in making sure that City Hall parking lot is accessible for all employees who work there, making sure that our public parking lots, such as the Old Yellowstone District parking lot, are accessible. We do all of the sidewalks along 4th Street, 12th Street, Conwell, and Beverly. And then make sure that the rec center is accessible and their parking lots are clear, as well as the transit facility. So this is where we focus our primary efforts at the beginning of our snow shifts at 4 a.m. to make them accessible before people are getting to work. So in all, we have over 100 areas that we are responsible for. And we can generally, even for priority 9, get to everything in a day, assuming that we don't have to put priority 1 on a loop because the snow is continuing so heavily we can't keep up. So that's what I have, and I would entertain any questions as well.
Councilman Kathy.
Could we get you to send us those maps?
Absolutely. Yes, thank you.
Because, yeah, I think some of our constituents might be interested, and if we have them and get a phone call, we can send them out then. So.
Mayor, Council, thank you for that feedback, and I know that Streets Department does have their maps published on the website, and it is our intention to do the same.
Oh, yours
We
are
just
on the
need to get
website
them.
as well?
They're not yet.
Oh, okay.
But we do intend to get them up there. We just want to make sure that everything's cleaned up and that the priorities make sense before we publish the information.
That would be fine then, as long as we get them on the website.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else with any questions? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, just as a kind of a couple conclusion remarks, if you will. One of the questions that I had for staff as we were preparing for this conversation with you all today was along the lines of, you know, if you had something that you needed that would help you to fight snow a little more efficiently and effectively and so on, what would that be? You know, aside from saying we need 3 more crews of 6 apiece or whatever, they indicated that indeed if there were the opportunity to look at purchasing an additional loader and maybe a couple pieces that would attach to a loader, then indeed that efficiency would go up fairly dramatically, and their efforts would be enhanced quite a bit. So one of the things I'd like you to think about, certainly as we, you know, anticipate the beginning of the budget planning session here coming up in the new year, might be to remember this possibility. Unfortunately, loaders aren't cheap. You know, they're in the neighborhood of $150,000, and oftentimes appurtenances aren't cheap either. You know, could be as much as $25,000-$50,000 as well. So if you would, though, keep that in mind. We may want to put that together for you to consider in a budget request, and indeed try to help our services be rendered more effectively and hopefully get people back on the streets more quickly. The last comment that I would make is I had the opportunity to visit with our superintendent just a couple few days ago, and he was just absolutely very complimentary of our teams that were represented here today in terms of getting schools back online and so forth back in March. And so I wanted to pass that along and make sure staff knew that you were aware of those praises, because he certainly represented that without their efforts, they would not have been able to get back to school as quickly as they did. So my thanks to them, and again, we appreciate your audience this evening.
Along those lines, you're asking us to consider purchasing more equipment. The one thing I would ask then for you folks to do, and you've maybe already done it, is I know last spring we actually hired third-party contractors to help us with the plowing. And my question would be is, how often do we need versus want this extra equipment versus going out and for the short period of time subcontracting that work out? So that's the other side of it. So I think we need to look at both sides of it.
No problem. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else on that, Mr. City Manager?
Yes, sir.
All right, we'll move on to bus stop safety shoveling, public awareness, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This really is almost a subset of the discussion that we just had. And certainly you'll recall, I believe it was January when we had the folks from the Disabled Citizens Council, if you will, come forward and give you a report and a review of what's going on and so forth with their efforts. They also included a discussion that brought to light the struggles that many of their colleagues and cohorts and friends are having as it relates to accessing our transit service via the bus stops and so on. You gave us the direction to consider that request and to find a means and ways of being able to help in this effort. Not only did Zulema, who is a liaison to that group, pay attention and take heed to that direction, but also our transit director, and Liz Becker, in her department, took heed to that as well, and came up with some really good ideas as a team to bring to your attention and let you know where we're at with that, and we're prepared to tell you that we're ready to pursue these recommendations this evening and hopefully make that access a little better, particularly where we can get the public's help in helping us to maintain these stops. I don't know if you knew this or not, but we've got in excess of 100 places where people can access the transit system throughout our community, not all of which are owned by the city, as you might imagine. And so with that in mind, I would like to invite Liz and Zulema back to the podium to go through the program that we'd like you to consider and give you the opportunity to ask any questions or offer direction you'd like to see happen.
Mayor, Council, thank you. So as City Manager Napier indicated in January of 2021, Casper's Council of People with Disabilities came and informed you of a concern that they had with access, particularly to our transit bus stops. And so city staff did go back to evaluate the city's responsibility in making sure that our properties were clear and accessible for people with disabilities. And so we identified that out of the 106 transit stops throughout the whole bus system, only 13 of those are on city property. And so certainly as part of our snow fighting plan, the City Parks Department has committed to ensuring that all of the sidewalks leading up to those transit bus stops adjacent to city property will be cleared so that those stops are accessible. But of course that leaves a fair number of stops that are not on city property. And so in order to kind of address that situation and ensure that we've got a plan in place to improve public awareness, Liz Becker stepped in and came up with some fantastic ideas that she'll be sharing with you.
Thank you, Zulema. Council, we're looking at it threefold. First, as Zulema indicated, we've got a lot of stops both in the shelters as well as just benches and signs that we need to be cognizant of. So this winter, what we'll be doing is having our transit employees that drive the fixed route. First of all, there's 6 routes that way. We're going to stock each of the fleet vehicles with a 5-gallon bucket of ice slicer, thanks to our streets department as well as our water department for providing the buckets. We also have outfitted each of the fleet vehicles with a shovel, snow shovel. So as the routes are stopping along each of those particular areas, we'll ask the drivers whether conducive to hop out and do a quick shovel if they need to, but also to spread the ice slicer. With that said, we also have the assist, which is the door-to-door. Same thing goes. You may be pulling up to a senior citizen's home to pick them up for a doctor's appointment. We want to make sure that the drivers have the equipment necessary to help a senior citizen if they've not been able yet to get out to shovel. Our assist drivers already do a lot of that, but we also want to make sure this season that they have additional supplies to do so. So that's what we're going to do during the snow, is to have our drivers step in to assist. Part 2 of the memo outlined a program for adopt a shelter or adopt a stop, and the details were provided in your council packets. But what we're looking at is engaging our service organizations, private businesses, or just citizens to help out with these stops that are not adjacent to city property. And many of them are business locations along 2nd Street. A lot of them are also in neighborhoods. And what we're going to do is to promote, with your agreement, this Adopt a Shelter program, so that the adoption organizations will be able to get some recognition in the shelters, as well as certificates and publication on our website. We will be supplying them with the materials, whether it's trash bags. So I don't want to just say it's going to be during the winter months. During the summer, too, if there's trash and debris at these shelters, they'll have trash bags, gloves. They will also have going through all my supply list here. They will have spray paint if they need to do a little bit of touch-up painting, if there's any graffiti or profanity written into some of our benches. We'll be looking at helping maintain that and having an organization help get that removed from the actual benches, or if there's scrape marks that just make something seem a little less tidy. So again, looking at debris, looking at cleaning the plexiglass. We have special product that we use to clean the inside of the plexiglass. So on the shelters, we'll be providing that material so that they can have paper towels and rags to wipe that down. We're looking at asking this to be done monthly. So again, a lot of that was spelled out, in the memo, but I wanted to let you all hear a little bit of the nuts and bolts as how we've done this. We do have liability agreements because we don't want people to get injured doing this or to have any of that. We have to have the legalese and that whole thing. So we mocked this program after YDOT's Adopt a Highway program. And we also studied other communities that have transit systems around the country that have Adopt a Shelter or Adopt a Stop programs. So our MPO team did a lot of that research, pulled this together, and with your permission, we would like to roll that out. The third component I wanted to bring up today, and this segues with what Zulema had mentioned also, is utilizing our Disability Council to help with the, here we go, I Count on You campaign. What we envision with this is having Disability Council members do a very quick PSA, and it's going to go something like this. I count on the link bus to get me to my job. I count on you to ensure that the sidewalks and bus stops are clear of snow and debris. Please maintain the sidewalks adjacent to your property. Next member would step up, again a different PSA. I count on the assist bus to get me to my doctor appointment. I count on you to ensure that the sidewalks and bus stops are clear of snow and debris. Please ensure that the sidewalks adjacent to your property are clear. So that's going to be a resounding message to let property owners know that by ordinance, they are required to maintain the sidewalks that are adjacent to their property. And if they do happen to have a bus stop there, whether it's the sign or a bench, that is ultimately their responsibility. But we're going to try to do it in a very caring, very meaningful outreach with the I Count on You, and to do this in a repeated pattern with different messages, because again, our riders are going to Casper College or school. They're also obviously going to employment, doctor's appointments, and we get many for the grocery store. So there's a lot of responsibility that I think the citizenry can help out with the partnership with our Disability Council. So I think the timing is very great to start on that with this particular snow season. So that's the three: drivers, organizations, and our Disability Council.
Councilwoman Ingbridge.
Are we going to get an opportunity to get more shelters? I see people standing out by those posts and freezing and standing there forever, it seems like. And so,
Your Honor, members of council, yes, we have the ability to put that into our capital plan. We have been looking at that. The shelters with installation are right at about $10,000 to give you all an estimate on that. And we will be repurposing one of them when the state office building opens up, because there's a new one over there. So we are very cognizant of the need, and we've even had individuals reach out about helping sponsor that. but that will be typically grant funded, again, whether it's state or federal or any of the private foundation grants. So that is something that we've recognized the need for. Yep. You'll see it coming.
Vice Mayor Pacheco.
Thank you. Not really a question, but a comment. I think obviously I'm 100% behind doing this. I think it's long overdue, and I think that one of the reasons we created the CCPD was awareness for things like this. And I know I've mentioned this in the past that we generally don't, if we're able to do things, climb stairs, walk down sidewalks, we take it for granted, and I think that's usually goes without saying, and I know that's a little cliche, but we do take it for granted. And sitting on the CCPD as a liaison from here, having an opportunity to have that conversation, to hear some of those issues that they face and being able to do that. So this is fantastic. I would encourage the citizens of Casper, if they are, to take ownership of their sidewalks for that very reason. But beyond that, just beyond the bus stops, beyond, look at your neighborhood to see what you can do, especially you don't know who might be have some type of disability, even the elderly beyond that too. So this was the reason I got on city council. These are the types of things that impact our community, and I think this is something that is should be just brought out into the community. So I appreciate you guys to be able to do that, and this is why we serve our community. And that's really what I say, this is about our community. And so I hope and I pray that our community does embrace this and adopt some shelters to be able to do this. So thank you guys for doing this. I appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. So, Mr. City Manager, you're needing direction on moving forward on that or not?
Mr. Mayor, if the council's comfortable with the approach that we're taking, it would be helpful to get a thumbs up in that regard. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else on that one?
No, sir.
All right. We'll move on to Citywide Facility Assessment Evaluation Agreement. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hopefully Ms. Lopez didn't get too far away from the podium here. She's going to get a lot of action tonight with all of you. She's overseeing this particular project, which got its genesis with respect to council goals that you all set and discussed during our last council goal session, if you will. The basic idea is with regard to getting our heads around what needs our facilities have that you all oversee. As you all know, and as we've discussed, and certainly we discussed during the budget process, we've got a lot of buildings right now that are aging out. In fact, the building we're in right now is 43 years old, and it's showing its signs, as you all know, and as we've discussed. The event center is certainly one of those vintage type buildings as well. The rec center. It goes on and on. And as a matter of fact, you may be surprised to know that we actually have 127 buildings that we're hoping to evaluate as a part of this process, which kind of surprised me, actually, with respect to that volume of facilities that we operate and oversee and maintain. Our problem is that we really don't know in a real comprehensive way what some of the physical plant issues are with regard to those buildings. And so in order for us to understand that and have a better, strategic approach available to us to be able to look after those buildings and work with them and provide key repairs and so on, we have to go through this kind of an analysis, which is why I think this project kind of rose to the surface with regard to the conversations we had during the council goal setting process, because you have a lot of questions about the buildings and where our priorities ought to be and what some of the needs are and so on. And unfortunately, at this point in time, we're ill-equipped to really provide you a lot of good answers and answers that you deserve. With that in mind, I asked Ms. Lopez here to help us engage in a relationship with some folks who, know how to do this and have the capacity to walk us through some of these questions in a more informed and technical way. And with regard to that, I'd like to invite Zulema back to the podium to walk you through some of the elements of this proposal that we're asking for you to consider. And then, of course, if you have questions or direction, we'd be happy to take that.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. So again, related to your city council goals regarding infrastructure and improving our infrastructure, $100,000 was budgeted for a citywide facility condition assessment to be completed. So the project really includes inventory of all of our building system assets, and those assets include, systems such as our exterior systems, so our roofing systems, our walls, windows, exterior doors, those systems on the exterior of the building, as well as interior systems such as our walls, interior doors, floors, ceilings, so finishes mostly. HVAC, so our heating, ventilation, and air conditioning units will also be evaluated as part of this process. Our electrical and our electrical distribution systems, plumbing systems, our fire protection systems, and then in a few cases, which I'll describe, some priority facilities, we'll also be evaluating our elevator systems, which of course from the Ford, Wyoming center failure, that's a big deal for us, and as well as site and infrastructure systems, which include all of our vehicular and pedestrian pavements. So a major component of this project is to inventory all of those assets and then determine the current condition. And for all those assets, we will be provided a facility condition index rating. And then all of this information, in addition to some cost estimates for improvements that are necessary, will be utilized to develop short and long-term capital replacement plans. So with input from city leadership, our executive team, Buildings and Structures did identify 127 buildings to assess, and we applied a metrics to that count to try to prioritize structures. And so thankfully, the contract will not be limited, so we won't have to remove any of the buildings, but certainly that process for prioritization will help moving forward with capital planning and how we identify which facilities or which systems we want to prioritize over others, because certainly the outcome will be that we need a lot of improvements, and we know that. So through the Sourcewell Cooperative Organization, we gained access to 7 different vendors that do facility condition assessments that have already been bid and vetted through the co-op. We were able to receive 5 quotes from those 7 vendors and ultimately selected Alpha Facilities Solutions to contract with, assuming your approval. So the deliverables of the project, the reports themselves are going to be separated into 2 parts. So 35 priority facilities were identified that will have full narrative reports. So they'll get every single system evaluated, and then Alpha will provide narrative reports with photographs and highlights of what capital assets need to be prioritized and replaced, and even some information as to how we may go about doing that, okay? For the remaining facilities, there will be non-narrative reports. All of the systems will still be evaluated with the exception of the 2 end ones, which were elevators and the exterior pavements. But all of the other components will be evaluated. They will also receive the facility condition index rating. Cost estimates will be applied, and that short and long-term reporting will be provided for all facilities. So included in this contract is also the deliverable for that 20-year capital renewal schedule. So we'll have the ability to do some short-term planning, but also some long-term planning with that 20-year capital report being a deliverable that the consultant will provide at the end of this project. And then finally, they utilize a software called APPS. And we will get subscription to that software where we will store all of our data in the cloud and have access. We will continue to maintain that subscription after this project is completed, so the buildings and structures staff can go in annually and make updates as we improve facilities, and we'll have a constant condition assessment across the board for all of our facilities and know where we need to prioritize our dollars. So that is really kind of the scope of the project and what we're hoping to accomplish. And certainly I would entertain any questions that you may have.
Councilman Gamros.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Zulema, for the presentation. I really only had one question, and that was, 7 companies were reached out to submit a bid, only 5 did so, and only one of which met all of our criteria and came in under budget, and it was what I thought was fairly, significantly under budget. I was just curious if you had any reasoning for why we only got one. What was it about just getting one to submit a proposal? With it being, about 67,000 with 100,000 budgeted. I'm surprised I didn't see a couple more companies come in there even over that, just under the $100,000 threshold. Thank you.
Mayor, Council. So actually, to clarify, we did receive 5 proposals. So there were 7 vendors within the co-op that provide facility condition assessment. 5 of them did submit proposals. There was only one that was under our budget amount. And then that one also happened to include all of our facilities. For others that we could have selected, we would have had to remove facilities in order to make budget.
So thank you. Follow up. Why is it you think the other 4 were choosing not to meet all the criteria and were over the $100,000? Like, what is it? Did these guys have any rationale for why they were able to come so far under budget and still do everything we were asking for? Thank you.
Mayor, Council, I believe, and I will definitely defer to Matt Thomason if he has some more details, but part of it is that we were able to negotiate that only 35 of those facilities would get that full-blown treatment, right? We would have the full narrative reports with all of the details. Certainly we have facilities throughout our network, the vast majority of them, that don't have elevators, so we wouldn't need that assessment. That, we can assess the condition of the sidewalks and the pavements ourselves, and so we were able to kind of narrow the scope and get that down with a little more flexibility that was provided by Alpha that maybe wasn't apparent with the other companies.
Thank you.
Carter, I have a question either for you or maybe Zulema can even answer it, but obviously the 80s were really good here as far as buildings go. What percentage of the buildings that we actually have in our inventory were built in that era? And I ask that in the respect of, we had a lot, I'm assuming quite a few were built and they're all aging at the same rate, which means that more than likely they're going to need repairs on all the buildings about the same time, so.
Mayor, unfortunately, I don't know what that is, but I can certainly give you that stat. We do have age inventory of all of our facilities, so we'll be able to get that to you.
Okay. Councilmember Pollock.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Zulema. I'm really enthusiastic about this. This was important to me when we first started talking about our goals, because I found it very difficult to try to prioritize without full visibility into what's coming our way. For the exact same feeling that the mayor has, that we're going to have a lot of facilities that are aging at the same time, and so I want to make sure that we are proactive about that. And in my mind, it makes a lot of sense to try to come up with a long-term forecast for what the expenses of each facility are going to be over the next 5, 10, 20 years, so that especially when we're having conversations about adding facilities to our portfolio, which have come our way a few times, I find those decisions really difficult to make when we don't know what sort of the load that the city is going to be expected to bear on our current facilities is. So I'm really excited to get this information. I do have one question. It looks like this covers the buildings themselves and some of the, the electrical, the HVAC. I'm wondering especially for some of our rec facilities where we have significant investment in equipment to run, are any of those pieces of equipment included, or can we do that internally somehow to include? I'm thinking of ski lifts at Hogadon, and I'm thinking of the chillers for the ice sheets and some of those big ticket items that are part of operating those facilities, not down to the minor equipment by any means, but some of the bigger stuff. Is that included as part of this analysis, or are we able to add that just internally because we know when those pieces of equipment were built and maybe have some information about the lifespan?
Mayor, Council, that's an excellent question, and unfortunately, the example that you gave regarding like the ski lifts, for instance, would not be included in this assessment. They are systems that are kind of specific to a facility rather than an amenity or a component of the operation. Certainly, you know, I know that Hogadon ski lift, part of our insurance program, requires that those are inspected annually, and then we develop capital replacement improvement plans based on those annual professional inspections that get done for that equipment. I would suspect that the same happens in some of our other specialty equipment, but certainly I would need to verify that. And then certainly what's not included, it is the intention of buildings and structures that in the end of this project with maybe a little additional staff work, we would have a comprehensive listing of all of our assets so that we know the age and condition and can include those in our capital planning.
Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, to add to what Ms. Lopez just responded with, you know, the good news with regard to Councilmember Pollock's question is that particularly as it relates to the ski lift, it wasn't too long ago where we did significant work with respect to replacing some of the wheels and whatnot that operate that lift. And so from the lift standpoint, it received some fairly hefty investment recently, and we feel pretty good about its longevity at this point in time. The same with the chillers at the ice arena. You know, those were all replaced not too long ago. Many of you remember how painfully long that project was and the delays we received and so on. The outcome of that is we've got a pretty good feel for those operating systems as well. Not that that is the entirety of what Councilmember Pollock's question was, but just to give you, a little bit of a insight into those major operational issues, I wanted to be sure that you were at least aware of those two items.
Councilmember Pollock.
Thank you, Mayor. And just a follow-up to that, I'm thinking specifically it would be helpful to me knowing that, like, since we do have information about when we've made those upgrades, how long do we expect them to last, and when do we expect that we would need to make them again? So I'm wondering, yeah, as Zulema said, maybe with some just internal work, we can sort of put together projection on those things that we're more familiar with because we've been upgrading them, periodically all along. I'm thinking of some of those things would be helpful to know. Are we good for 10 years? Are we good for 20 years? Are we good for 40 years? What do we need to be planning for with these facilities?
And Carter, if I could just add on to what she's saying also is that, and use the example of the ice arena, for instance, forever that condensing unit over there, I know we put bubble gum and everything else on that thing to hold it together until we finally made a decision to move the chiller out of the event center down there and put that investment in. So I think where Councilmember Pollock's going with this is just simply knowing, are there pieces of equipment out there that we keep fixing, and would a replacement be the smartest thing to do as opposed to continually throwing money at something that eventually is going to have to get replaced anyways. Any other comments or questions from anybody? All right, thank you again.
You'll see me one more time.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, before we leave this topic completely, I want to put a bug in your ear if I could. One of the major facilities that will be included in this analysis, strictly from a physical plant standpoint, is the Ford Wyoming Center. What I would like to tell you, though, and ask for you to consider, is that considering just the physical plant issues for that building may not be enough. We may want to take some time and extra analysis to consider whether or not a facility of that nature that was designed and built in the 80s and was designed and built with, the way the world operated and the entertainment business operated in the 80s is sufficient for moving forward for the next 20 to 30 years that we hope to get out of that building. And so what I'm proposing as an idea is that we may want to take the extra step of considering whether or not the event center is built for and is appropriately used in a manner that considers the way in which the entertainment industry operates now and into the foreseeable future versus the way it operated back in the early 80s. I'm not proposing a major capital project at this point in time, and I'm certainly not suggesting we shut it down and use, just a top level or something crazy like that. What I am suggesting, however, is we may want to take some additional thought and effort to determine whether or not there aren't things we can consider that might position the Ford Wyoming Center for the way we do business now and into the near future. So my request would be that we take some time to have that conversation. I would like to invite Visit Casper and Spectra into this conversation to get their input with all of you and see what you think about taking that additional step with just the Ford Wyoming Center at this point in time.
Is everybody okay with bringing them into it? Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And Mr. City Manager, you needing as far as direction tonight on moving forward with doing the evaluations on the buildings?
Indeed, Mr. Mayor, and what that would result in is a contract for your formal consideration on the floor, if you're amenable.
And that would be with the group that came in less?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is everybody okay with that? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to Tanny Field and Mike Lansing Field update. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council will recall about a year ago, maybe less, we had the operating agreements for these two facilities expire. And as you probably remember, these were long-standing agreements that we deferred much of the operations of these two facilities to third-party outside, external stakeholders, if you will, Mike Lansing and Tanny Fields. After some analysis and discussion with all of you, and in fact, some of you may not have even been on the council at this point in time that I'm referring back to. The direction was, after we had gotten some proposals and so forth, to give internal operation and management a try for a year to see if, in fact, we could realize some savings and some expense reduction and maybe even incur some revenue that we haven't incurred before as being the operator of these two important facilities to our recreational world here in Casper. We've gone through a season with respect to these two facilities being operated and managed internally. And we have a follow-up report, if you will, with regard to that experience and, how we think it's going. And as a matter of fact, as you probably read in your memo, we did reach out to our stakeholders to see what their experience was as well, our user groups and so forth. And so we've gotten some data back from them also. What I would invite you to tune into during Ms. Lopez's report is, whether you concur with our recommendation, which is to continue from the standpoint of operating this internally, whether or not you concur with respect to the pricing strategy that we are following at this point in time. Because indeed, one of the elements that was attractive to me in terms of operating this internally was the fact that we would have a better shot at making sure that this was a kind of a zero cost situation for the city, whereas in the past it had operated from a subsidy standpoint. And I know that from conversations with you, considering the means and ways by which we can eliminate subsidies, particularly in our recreational world, you seem to have some appeal to that. And so if you think that this is an appropriate path to get to that result for one small part of our operations, then I would hope you would agree that continuing internally is a good way to go. But I invite you to listen to the data, hear the report, ask questions, and we will take your direction accordingly.
Mayor and Council, thank you. So I do want to kind of recap some history and make sure that you're familiar with the fee structure. It was on page 40 and 41 of your council packet. So the rental fees were set again with the goal to reduce the subsidy of these two baseball or ball field operations, and considered staff, materials, equipment costs, as well as the square footage of the facilities in order to come up with those fees. And certainly stakeholders did assist us in establishing those rates. But to ease the transition for these user groups that were going from a standard lease agreement that they had operated under for a number of years to this more rental city-managed structure, we wanted to kind of ease them into that transition. And so discounts were applied for a period of 3 to 4 years based on the facility. So I want to make sure that that you understand that that's what we're kind of functioning under. That's what we're reporting our future estimates based on those discounts remaining in place. And certainly we would take feedback if you think that something needs to change there. So ultimately, we feel like the operation was a success. And, the city is definitely in a much better financial position managing these two operations on our own. We operated from April to September for baseball. City was responsible for prepping all the fields for practices, games, and tournaments. And then the users or the renters were responsible for the cleanliness of the facilities after use. And so there's more details on page 39 about what field prep entailed for us, but in general, city preps all of the fields and maintains the facilities, and users are responsible for cleaning up after they've used the facility. So at the end of the season, we did do a debrief and definitely recognize some areas for improvement. Probably the biggest item that came out of these sessions was that there was some communication breakdown with scheduling, and that could improve in the future. And so the user groups among themselves agreed and committed to communicating better about what the needs were for scheduling, making sure that everybody had adequate use of the fields when they needed them for their practices, their games, and their tournaments. In addition to that, the city will commit to having a specific meeting to talk about scheduling with all users present so that we could kind of button that down a little bit better and avoid conflicts with the schedule. Certainly, city employees and our staff that's assigned to managing these operations also provided some feedback to our users that the cleanliness could improve a little bit, and they agreed that they would try to improve in that area. Another item that came up was that the lighting at Tanny Field could be improved, and so that is an item that we've acknowledged prior to now. In fact, we've had some assessments done to identify the condition of the lighting at Tanny Field and what the capital cost would be to replace those. So we'll be revisiting those capital considerations during upcoming budget discussions. And then finally, we do recognize that the raccoon infestation at Mike Lansing Field was a challenge for the season. So you may recall that how this came to be is when we were getting ready for summer startup, buildings and structure staff that was in the facility for the first time in quite a while because of COVID. The facility was mostly vacant and there wasn't a lot of access there. So they found that there were holes in the walls. They found signs that the animals had kind of gotten in there and set up roost. And so we had some people come out and take a look and found that it was pretty widespread. They had dozens of animals had gotten in there and created nests and homes and had many, many babies. And so it was a pretty significant issue that we had to address throughout the season with remediation. And at this point now we are still soliciting quotes for a rebuild with the hopes that we will have that done by next season. So again, in terms of our financials, I think that it did put the city in a pretty good position. So if I could refer you to the charts under the financial consideration section of your memo. So for Mike Lansing Field, again, that discount structure I wanted to remind you of. In 2021, we established the hourly rates and the fees associated with that facility. But for 2021, we said we would give you 50% discount for all the renters of that facility. The plan for 2022 is that a 30% discount would be applied to that rate. In 2023, it would be 10%, and then by 2024, we would not provide a discount, and we would realize the full value of the rates that we establish, again, with the stakeholders' input. So as you can see, on average, for 2018 through 2020, our revenues, because of the leases that had been in place for so many years, that had really only required $1 a year for the lease agreement, in some cases maybe some small player fees, we were only earning about $230 a year in revenue, but we were expending about $13,500 a year in maintenance costs, because even under the existing lease agreements, we were responsible for mowing the fields, maintaining the irrigation systems, those kinds of things. So moving into 2021 for our actuals, we received revenues close to $15,000 at Mike Lansing Field. Certainly our maintenance expenses increased at that facility because we needed to expend extra resources to get the playing fields up to a better quality than they had been previously. And also because of the field preparation that we were doing that we had not done under the existing lease agreements, those maintenance costs did go up. But so if you look under the 50% discount that the users are receiving, when you factor in our revenues minus our maintenance expenses, we're at approximately 46% or 47% subsidy. Estimates for 2022, if we were to honor that 30% discount, would put our subsidy at about 36%. Now this is assuming that we will maintain consistent rentals year over year, and also assumes that our maintenance expenses will stay fairly consistent year over year. By 2023, we hope to reduce that subsidy to under 25%, and then by 2024, we hope to have that subsidy under 8% at Mike Lansing Field. For George Taney, the outlook is even better. This year, we applied a 20% discount to their rates, which resulted in only a 17% subsidy, which is pretty astounding considering that we were at 85% subsidized before for the George Taney operation. In 2022, we estimate that we'll be just over 7% subsidy, with them only applying a 10% discount to rates that year. And then by 2023 at Taney, we should actually be in a positive situation with regard to revenue. So that is my report, and I am happy to entertain any questions that you might have.
Councilman Gamros.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Zulima, again, for another presentation. I guess I was curious to see these numbers that, that you mentioned that we were only earning $230 in revenue at Mike Lansing for several years in a row. I found it quite astounding that we got up to $15,000 after just the first year of taking over operations, and so I guess my question is, you said these projections are based on user level remaining consistent. Have you gotten feedback from these folks? I imagine the discount, us lowering the discount year over year, is an attempt to acclimate these user groups to, you know, a different rate schedule. And so I'm curious to hear what the feedback is you've received from those folks about whether they believe they will be able to, you know, whether they also think they'll be able to maintain consistency over the next several years, if you've gotten any feedback from them in that regard. Thank you.
Mayor, Council, thank you for that question. So in our debriefing sessions, we did specifically ask if they felt the fees were fair. And for 2021, at those discounted rates, all indications were that they did believe that they were fair. They were not overpriced or underpriced. Moving forward, I think only time will tell if they are able to maintain the same number of rentals based on the cost. However, we do feel like giving them the additional time to prepare gives them time to adjust their fundraising efforts in different situations there so that they can improve their financial positions and be able to play. Also consider, though, that they don't have the expense of maintenance on themselves. So, you know, that should definitely assist in offsetting that expense for those groups.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you. Follow-up. I also noticed, I believe it was for Mike Lansing Field, yeah, it seemed like from user groups, so Heart and Fight Company represented like 30% of the user group revenue. It looks like based on just 2 events they held over the summer. I'm curious, have you received any feedback from folks? And I know your role at Parks is short, so I imagine you probably haven't had this conversation yet, but I'm curious if there's more groups in the community that maybe would use Mike Lansing or Tanny Fields as a venue space, and for one reason or another they have been prohibited from doing so the past several years. I'm wondering, have we explored what we as an agency or as a city can do to incentivize or encourage people to use those facilities for those sorts of purposes? Because that seems like a pretty good deal, you know, $2,500 in revenue for a single night, as opposed to, you know, the other user groups, it requires constant maintenance, constant upkeep, but that's a kind of one and done type thing. So just curious if we've explored that in the past. Thanks.
Mayor, council member, thank you for that question. So I'm on day 15 officially in my role, but I can say that I have had some preliminary discussions and there are indications that there is interest. I think that we could look at doing events such as this to bolster the revenue at these facilities, particularly later in the season after baseball is over, and having large groups of people on the turf isn't gonna impact the playing surface for our, you know, regular users. So, but there is kind of a window of time between, you know, mid to late August through September when the weather's still nice and outdoor events are certainly a good possibility for us. And so I have heard that there is interest and we will certainly pursue those avenues moving forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Pollock.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you again, Zulima. My question is, well, I first of all, I do support the direction that we're heading with this. I think that because these are city facilities, the maintenance should be taken care of by us, because I think people either way assume it is taken care of by us, and so we'll expect a certain, we'll still be held to account for the maintenance there. So I like having that fall under our list of duties. The one question I have, I'm looking at the rental information sheet that's in our packet. I did get a couple calls over the summer related to, I think it was mostly like cleanliness and trash in the bleacher area, like in the audience area. And I don't see anything in the rental information about that area. It looks like the field prep, the dugouts, the fence line, etc. I'm wondering if there are expectations for how the bleachers and those, I guess, spectator areas will look when the city hands it off to the user group versus how it will look during the tournament versus how it will look when they hand it back. Do we have sort of expectations for that set? Is that in a different document? Should it be included in this document?
Mayor, council member, that is an excellent point. And if it's not included in the kind of outline of responsibilities, it certainly should be, because we do have the expectation that when we turn it over to the user, the entire facility is clean, including the areas around the bleachers. But certainly we would have the expectation that after a user finishes their practice game, tournament, whatever it may be, that they return it to us in a similar condition. Good and clean and picked up. And certainly I know that we fielded several complaints over the summer. I believe a majority of those complaints were related to the Field of Dreams, which of course is not part of what we are currently managing. So we did work with the leaseholder at those facilities to address that.
Any other questions? Councilman Gamros?
Thank you. That brings up another question for me, I guess. Field of Dreams, can you remind me which field we're referring to?
So,
Over by the Boys and Girls Club on the east side? Okay. So it sounds like in that area, we still have more of this historical type management agreement. You know, maybe this is a discussion for after. We've only managed Mike Lansing and Tanny for a year, so maybe see how we do after a second or third year. But looking at these numbers, I'd be very curious to see what the revenues is over in that area and whether we should explore internally managing those as well. Thank you.
Mayor, council member, I would like to add, so certainly I think this staggered kind of prorated discount program was somewhat intentional to give us a period of time where we could evaluate if this was a good model for us or not. And then likewise, the renewals of the existing leases that still remain were purposely timed to end around the same time period so that we could make decisions at that time, whether or not it makes sense for us to pursue a different structure. So just to give you an idea, so Field of Dreams right now, the current lease is up in 2026. For all other leases, they're up in 2023, but these are one-year terms with the option to renew annually for up to 3 years.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'll ask you later.
Sorry, was I staring at you?
I think everyone could tell I was holding one in, but I'll wait. Thanks.
Okay.
No, I'm fine. I really am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Do you have anything else on that, Mr. City Manager?
Mr. Mayor, I don't, but you know, to answer real briefly with respect to Councilman Gamros's question about fees, my guess is the comparison that you would see would be pretty similar to the comparison you're experiencing right now with that transition taking place if we were to move in this direction with the other facilities. So that's just a hunch, but we can certainly prepare some data.
That sort of answers the question I would have asked. So, thanks.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda review. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple things I wanted to point out with respect to your grid document that you should have in front of you. The transfer of ownership that you've had a lot of questions about as it relates to Mr. Taylor's license. That public hearing is taking place the next time we meet, November 2nd. And so you'll have the opportunity to ask questions and be assured that what you were told was going to happen is going to happen. And I'm pretty convinced that that will be the case. We also have a new microbrewery license in the form of Blacktooth Brewing, which we've heard a lot about coming in at the properties located at South David that you're also very familiar with. One of the things I wanted to bring to your attention, though, to make sure you understood real clearly, you will see a number of agreements taking place with respect to a number of projects that we're doing in partnership with YDOT over the next several years. Those cooperative agreements get us into the opportunity to not only help participate in those projects, but also participate in putting together the context-sensitive amenities that YDOT has given us some funding for and that we've talked about to some degree here in these meetings. I wanted to assure you that by virtue of passing those agreements, you are not signing off on a design. You're only signing off on the agreements with YDOT as well as their contractors to move forward with their work. But you will still see design options come forward, and you'll have the opportunity to weigh in and select things that you want to see happen and reject things that you don't. So don't be worried that indeed we've missed the opportunity to participate in that design process, because indeed that is only the beginning steps. You also see a resolution in here with respect to participating in the film office program that you heard about a number of weeks ago by now as well. Moving into the work session of November 9th, we are anticipating a couple follow-up items with you as well for that meeting. One of which is the phase 3 of the Graves implementation, wherein we will be providing you options to consider for employee compensation. We also will be bringing data forward that discusses watering of our parks and so on, which is a follow-up item to the budget discussions of April timeframe of this year. And then, of course, with regard to whatever directions you'd like to give us in order to save money in that effort, that certainly would be welcomed feedback. The other thing that I'm excited to share with you on the 9th is with regard to the council goals portal that staff has been putting together for this council goals process and hopefully future council goals processes, so that you can follow on a real-time basis with respect to what's happening in the completion of the goals that you have directed us to embrace. And so that's an exciting improvement that hopefully you'll find useful. I would also direct you to the back page of the grid document so that you can see which items are on, sort of the horizon, if you will. And of course, if you see things there that you have questions about, or you don't see things that you'd like to see docketed, that's the purpose of this portion of what we call the grid document for you. So that we can plan our meeting horizon a little more effectively with you. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'd take any questions on the agenda review.
Doesn't look like there's any questions.
All right, thank you.
Okay. We'll council around the table. Councilmember Pollock.
Don't have anything tonight.
Okay. Councilman Nell.
Thank you. I was going to bring this up to you in private, Carter, but we were talking about roads and snow removal, and last year we invited the public to use our 311 system, I believe it was, to reach out, which my in-laws did, and they just got their answer last week. And that was put in last March. So we might want to look at that system. It's certainly not being timely, at least in their affairs. So, and she was shocked to have gotten her response. She's like, because she had forgotten about it, because she never heard back, and then finally she got an answer almost 7 months to the day. So I think that's important to note. Lastly, as you all know, I've been working on trying to figure out a way to help our outer departments with trauma counseling, and it's progressed rather quickly after meeting with the chief and the sheriff and the hospital. It looks like we're going to be able to maybe get something put together to help our people facilitate the needs that they have. And financially, I think it looks like it's going to end up saving us money in the long run. So that's all I can give you for right now.
Councilman Cassie.
Nothing tonight.
Councilwoman Ingebretson. Councilman Johnson.
Nothing tonight.
Councilman Gamros.
Thank you, Mayor. All I have is over the weekend, I and I believe several of us attended Dancing with the Stars fundraiser for Mercer Family Resource Center. It was a really great event, like always, really entertaining. They raised a lot of money for a good cause, so I just would like to congratulate them on another successful year. And if you're not familiar with their programs or you've never attended the event before, I'd encourage you to check it out next year and check out their Facebook, see what they offer. They do a lot of programming. They offer a lot of services. So just want to congratulate them on another successful event. Thanks.
Vice Mayor Pacheco.
Thank you. CCPD Thursday at 11:30. So I will be there for that, and I'll report on what's going on. Which is great. We'll be able to talk a little bit about, I'm sure, what's going on here with some of the initiatives we're doing. And part of that too, for the Mercer Family Resource, they house the Youth Empowerment Council, which we help to fund. And so all the money that they did raise for that goes towards a lot of youth programming. And Mercer is real near and dear to my heart. I used to work there, so I love that place. So anyway, I didn't get to make it this year because of prior engagements, but it sounded like it was really good. So thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cassie.
One thing that, it wasn't anything that I did, but to put out to the public, everybody needs to remember that a week from today is a special election for the 6-cent tax. So whether you're for it, against it, but get out and vote. This is an off-season election, so to speak. Most people have forgot about it, so I wanted to bring that up, that is a week from today. And absentee voting and actually in-person voting is open right now at the courthouse until 5 p.m. on next Monday at 5 o'clock. So, thank you. Wanted to bring that up.
All right. Well, the only thing I had to add was Mercer was the biggest crowd they've ever had. So, the record number this year. So I have nothing else tonight. However, at 7 o'clock, I guess we're staying on track on that. So ribbon cutting ceremony over at the Old Yellowstone District parking lot, the Goodstein parking lot. So we'll be in adjournment, and I'll see everybody over there. Thank you.